everyone, it's Maha. Thank you for joining me again here on my channel. So finally, almost the end of September, and I've decided to do a video response in response to Kellyanne Maddox's Self-love September series. I'm going to be honest, I wasn't going to do this video. I mean, at first I thought there's no way I'm going to do this video because it's just going to be way too hard to sit right here and talk to you guys about my past. And then I realized that one of the reasons why I decided to make this channel was to share and to learn through other stories is what I love to do, and I love YouTube for that. Listening to people's personal stories really adds wisdom and insight to my life in every way. So I decided that it's important for me to share my story. Also, I agree with Kellyanne that our individual stories are important. So just in case, by the way, if you haven't watched Kellyanne Maddox's Self-love September series, I have posted one of her earlier videos in September 2016 down below in the description menu, so you can check it out. She does this thing every year in September. She does a series called Self-love September, where she talks about different topics on the subject of self-love. And this year she's asked us to contribute, her viewers to contribute by telling their own stories. So I decided that it was important that I share my story. And I also felt that this is kind of a point in my channel where I feel that I'm ready to open up a little more and to share with you. So we'll see how it goes. I'm going to talk about my story, but I don't want to dwell on my story too much. I want to just tell it to you guys as briefly as I can, and then just talk about what self-love means to me, how I've come to discover self-love, and how I try to bring it to my everyday life. So as some of you already know, I was born in Iran, a country in the Middle East, and I spent the first 10 and a half years of my life living in Iran before moving to Canada. And at the time when I lived there, there was the Iran-Iraq war happening, so the Gulf War. And I spent my whole entire childhood in a country at war. My parents had just gone through a huge revolution. They were dealing with their own post-traumatic stress disorders, so they weren't really able to, I guess, be calm. I was always surrounded by a lot of anxiety, both within my own home and in the entire country, because there was a war happening. There was a lot of chaos, a lot of difficulties. And my parents were actually living in the south of Iran in a city called Abadan, which is on the very, very southern tip of Iran. And it was just actually where the war was. It was the site of the war. So they went through the experience of war really firsthand. And when I was a baby, they decided to move to the capital of the country, Tehran, which was a lot safer, and that's where we lived before moving to Canada. And so there were country at war, and then the other stress for me was school. Going to school in Iran at the time was really hard for kids. It was super strict, extreme discipline. If we didn't do our homework or did badly on a test, and by badly I mean lower than 65%, we would get severely punished, physically beaten by the teachers. So I had a lot of stress. I didn't want to do badly at school. I was going through a lot. From stress, I developed a stomach ulcers at the age of 8 from worrying and from stress. So I'm just going to stop right here because I've only recently to tell you the truth, started talking about all this just very recently. I could not talk about it even with my very close friends. But I am writing a book about my childhood, not only about my childhood, about many other things. I'm writing a book, and what I'm going to do now is I've decided to read you a couple of paragraphs from my book, because I realized that my heart is already beating, and I wouldn't be able to actually share my childhood really with you. There is no way I could explain to you what it feels like to live in a country at war. There's just no possible way I could do that. And I thought that by reading, I can also detach from the story myself. If I feel like I need to, I might take a pause and re-record this video, because like I said, I just didn't want to talk about this that much, but then I changed my mind, and I'm going to decide whether I'm going to post this video or not. But I'm going to read you a couple of paragraphs now. So I'll start reading this, and then I'll continue with my story. Living in a country at war had become a norm for my friends and I. We hadn't tasted life otherwise. We had regular drills at school in case of an emergency bombing. When the emergency alarm went off, we would hide underneath our desks following the procedures. Our teachers would then assemble us in rows as we headed out onto the schoolyard and into our hiding space, an underground water storage room. As we descended down the stairs into the dark and extremely large storage room in attempts to lighten up the mood and to possibly avoid feeling our fear, my friends and I laughed and joked as if the entire process was a huge prank. Outside of school times, sirens frequently appeared on the national television and the radio throughout the day on scheduled times as a preparation procedure in the case of an actual attack. It was normal to expect blackouts every night regardless of an attack, and my siblings and I knew that any homework left unfinished before dark would have to be completed in the candlelight. When the Iraqi planes attacked, which was almost every night and sometimes throughout the day, the horrible shriek of the sirens would engulf the entire city. On those particular evenings, my family and I would take refuge underneath the staircase of the main floor in our house following dinner, as we anxiously waited for the sirens to signal the enemy's departure, knowing that at any moment, everything we knew to exist could disappear into dust within seconds. We lived down the block from the city's main military post, which meant an added bonus of intimately experiencing the crashing of the anti-aircrafts, making it all intensely real. My mother, who at the time was pregnant with my little sister, would get unbearably nervous, trembling with fear and breaking into tears. Meanwhile, my father, swallowing his own fears, spoke to her softly, trying to keep her somewhat contained. My older brother remained quiet, crouching in a corner as if in deep thought while he scanned each of us momentarily before returning his gaze back again into space. My little brother giggled his way through the entire experience, alleviating his own confusions by seeing the whole event as an odd form of entertainment. I was too distracted by my mother's suffering to feel any of my own, and if any unwanted feelings did come up, I rode along my little brother's boat for a while, desperately wishing that faking humor would make them go away. But the blasting noise coming from the anti-aircrafts was impossible to ignore, and the magnitude of each and every crash sent painful vibrations in my heart like a kind of violent thunderstorm. I remember coming home one day after school and finding all the glass windows in our house shattered into tiny pieces. Our wall-to-wall glass patio had disappeared into mounds of dust. On that particular day, a bomb had been dropped at the military post near my house. My mom had been home alone that day. So, I think if there was only one message that I could get across from telling you my story, would be that no matter, how do I say this? You see me here, for example, on my channel, we share all these fun things together, things that we love, like astrology, oracle, tarot. And here I am in Canada, safe, comfortable life, North America. And yet I lived that. That was me. And so I guess what I want to say is that no matter where we live, no matter what we look like and what part of the world we're from, we are all human. And we are connected through our emotional experiences. We're connected through our suffering. We're connected through our pain. We're connected through our joys and happiness also. And that anyone, any human being, can go through things that sometimes we find on the news, on TV, on the internet. We might think that we're so far away from that, but we're all connected. We're all human, and it's possible to feel pain. Anyway, so fast tracking, I moved to Canada when I was 11 and a half. I'm not going to go through the whole story, but wow, this is hard. So school in Canada, coming to Canada was a whole other set of difficulties. I spoke zero English. It was hard for my whole family, but for me, going to school was really hard. I was thrown into grade 8. I finished grade 5 in Iran. I went to ESL, English as a Second Language school in Canada for 6 months, 5.5 months. And then I was thrown straight into high school. I skipped 2 grades. They wanted me to skip 2 grades because my schooling in Iran was really, I guess schooling in Iran is really advanced, and they were much more ahead in mathematics, for example. So my principal suggested that I skip at least 2 grades. And so school was really hard. I went to an all-white school, meaning no immigrants. I was the only one who was different. I was the only one who was not from North America. I didn't speak English. Everything about me was wrong. My name, my physical looks, my features, my hair. I wanted to change everything about me. I went through a few years of being shameful of my own identity, and even making up stories to people that I met about where I came from, lying about where I came from, lying about my own nationality, lying about being Iranian. Everything about me was not good. And I had to, really, it took me years to accept who I am. And I was, I guess, the target of being made fun of at school for being different, but teachers were not nice either. They were not understanding. I was called a terrorist by people, adults, not the students at the school, not my teachers, but adults, and I have throughout my life, even as an adult, I have been called a terrorist just because I was born in Iran. So being subject to all kinds of things. And, then life goes on. I grew older. There's, as life happens, relationship breakups, health issues. I had a very bad health issue that I suffered with 10 years ago. I injured 2 of my shoulders. A lot of you know that I'm an artist. I was a full-time artist at the time. I was working way too much. I was also a professional dancer. I used to teach Middle Eastern dance and belly dance. I used to do kung fu, and I was basically abusing my body way too much. So I injured my shoulders. I had to stop making my art. Then I really fell into depression because I had to stop doing many things. My life completely changed. I became really ill. I was diagnosed with a very rare small intestinal bacteria, but I suffered for a year and 9 months going misdiagnosed. Before that, I ended up in the hospital. I had lost all my weight. I was anorexic. I was in bed for 7 months. I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. I was just watching TV. Then 5 years ago, I injured my back, my pelvis. It was a re-injury from martial arts, and I re-injured it. And then I injured my right knee as well. It's a nerve injury. So I'm dealing with a lot of chronic pain. And I don't want to, like I said, talk too much about that, just to kind of tell you what happened and where I am now. But my childhood kind of set the stage for having anxiety all throughout my life. And it was only until recently that I actually was with a friend one day, and she knew a lot about psychology, and I was with her somewhere and something happened, and I had a panic attack, and she pointed it out to me. And that was the very first time in my whole entire life that I realized I was having a panic attack. And I suffered with anxiety all my life since childhood. I never really knew that I was suffering with anxiety until 5 years ago, when I injured my back and my knee, and I had to stop my normal everyday life. I had to stop working, and then I really was faced with myself. I was faced with everything that I had from my past, and I had to work with them, explore them, learn from them. And I don't want any of you to be upset and be sad for me. That's not the point of the story. So what is the point of the story? We'll come to that. Yeah, so that's my story, and it hasn't been easy. So just a few years ago, I guess, when I first heard of the concept of self-love, I had no idea what it meant. I was like, what is self-love? How do I do it? What do I do? How do I self-love? I mean, there's no step-by-step manual on how to self-love, really. I looked. There really isn't a specific guideline on how to love yourself. It's something that's different for everyone, and we have to find it. And what we need to feel nurtured is different for each and every one of us, although we, of course, share commonalities. For me, when I had trouble really understanding what self-love is, I was practicing mindful meditation because of anxiety. I guess I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. I mean, that's just the common term they give to many people, so I don't know. I'm still working on this. This is another reason why in the beginning, my inner critic was telling me, like, who are you to make this video? You're not the queen of self-love. What do you know about self-love? You're just you're still trying to figure it all out. And it's true, I am still trying to figure it all out, and it's an everyday practice. So I came across this quote in a book, one of my mindfulness books, that said, in Buddhist psychology, self-blame and guilt are different forms of self-hatred. So that was really eye-opening for me, because I realized that if self-blame and guilt are different forms of self-hatred, then the opposite of that, self-love, could be self-kindness and self-compassion. And that's when I discovered self-compassion, mindful self-compassion practice. And I began to practice that and bring it to my mindfulness meditation. And I read lots of books about self-compassion. And for me, self-compassion was an entrance to self-love. It was a way that I found how I could access self-love. So self-compassion, for me, it means being kinder to myself. It taught me to be more gentle with myself, be more kind, be more self-compassionate, be more forgiving, forgive myself for for everything, for even forgiving myself for the times that I forget to be mindful. More importantly, though, self-compassion is about self-acceptance. And I have come to learn that self-acceptance is really at the core of self-love for me. I don't know if any of you have ever seen Once Upon a Time. It's a TV series that you can watch on Netflix. I really like it. There was an episode a long time ago, probably in the very first season, that it's a fairy tale based TV show. So Snow White was really sad one day. She was really depressed because her handsome prince had decided to marry someone else. And so she was really sad, she was down, she was crying, she was in bed all day, she just looked like a mess. And then she went for a walk with Grumpy, one of the 7 dwarfs, and she said to Grumpy, she said, Grumpy, don't you just want to sometimes just forget your pain? Don't you want to forget it all? Because apparently Grumpy had a really hard life. And then Grumpy looked at her and said, no, Snow White, I don't want to forget my pain. I don't want to forget my pain because if it wasn't for my pain, I wouldn't be grumpy. That sentence really stuck to me. If it wasn't for my pain, I wouldn't be grumpy. So accepting, self-acceptance for me, means accepting my pain, accepting my past, accepting my parenting or the parenting I may feel that I didn't have, accepting my inability to cope well with chronic pain, and even the parts of me that really wanted to go away. Accepting it all, accepting the whole package as me, and just accepting my life as it is, without comparing myself to anyone, without comparing my life to anyone, just accepting it all unconditionally. Just like Isis holds her baby unconditionally with love. And I drew a Isis card that I wanted to show you, but I didn't bring it. A few days ago, I drew an Isis card. I think I'll go get it. This is a card I drew a few days ago from the Mother's Wisdom Oracle deck, and I just love this image of Isis. She's so nurturing. Look at her holding her baby. So beautiful. Just loving the baby unconditionally. And if it would be possible to hold myself just as Isis is holding the baby in her arms, loving her unconditionally. I love this image. Sharon Salzberg said it best. She said, love is not a quality. Love is an ability. Love is not a quality. Love is an ability. And we can hold ourselves, just like Isis on this card, hold ourselves with love and acceptance unconditionally, no matter what we're feeling, no matter what we've been through. And it's possible. I learned to train myself to love myself and to practice that as much as I can and forgive myself when I forget to do it. So I'm sending you lots of love. Thank you so much for listening, for watching. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. And sending you lots of blessings. More importantly, don't forget to love yourselves and appreciate yourselves. Bye, everyone.